William Porter, the father of Cape liberalism. The author was the historian J.L. McCracken. On the right of the cover, there's a picture of William Porter. On the back cover of the book, we are told, William Porter was born in Limavady in 1805. His father was a Presbyterian minister belonging to the liberal New Light group in the church. Porter was called to the Irish bar in 1831. His own and his family's strong liberal convictions led to his appointment in 1839 as Attorney General of the Cape Colony, which is in South Africa. Porter came to the colony, he said, with an unspeakable hatred of oppression of every kind. As Attorney General, he insisted on equal justice for all, blacks and whites, masters and servants. The Constitution he drew up in 1854 provided for a parliament elected by blacks and whites on equal terms. After retiring in 1865, he was elected to Parliament and worked for responsible government, for religious freedom, and for the propagation of such advanced ideas as higher education for women. In 1873, he returned to Ireland until his death in 1880. And that's an account from the back of the book written by the historian J.L. McCracken. And William Porter comes across as a generally, progressive and good guy. The impression given in the blurb for the book is that William Porter's progressive ideas on race, religion, and gender were shaped by his liberal Ulster Presbyterian heritage. But can we not at least introduce the possibility that his progressive actions and ideas were shaped by something else? By his being queer. So was William queer? McCracken, in his biography, very briefly addresses this. Writing about William's relationship with another Ulster Protestant, Hugh Liner, he states, whether or not it rested on a homosexual basis, it is impossible to say. The historian McCracken comes to that conclusion despite also telling us the following about their relationship. And I quote from his biography. When Porter set out for the Cape, he was accompanied by his friend, Hugh Liner, who was to remain a lifelong companion. For the decades of their lives in the Cape, Porter and Liner lived together and were rarely separated for their years at the Cape. When Porter was appointed Attorney General, his main concern was to have Liner installed as his clerk. For many years, they worked not only in the same office, but on opposite sides of the same office table. Most days after finishing work in the office about 4 o'clock, he and Liner went for a walk. When Liner died in 1873, Porter left the colony for good 3 weeks later. The Cape Argus newspaper in 1873, at the time of Hugh's death, wrote of their relationship as, I quote, as all but unprecedented in the annals of friendship. And the local newspaper, the Grahamstown Journal, printed the following in memoriam at the time of Hugh Liner's death. I'm just trying to bring forward my... So I'm reading from what was published in the Grahamstown Journal in 1873, in memoriam. The death of Mr. Hugh Liner, which took place at Mowbray on the 23rd, is an event which by all who knew him will be learned with profound sorrow. And this regret will be intensified, not merely by the loss of the deceased, but for the sympathy which must be felt for one who had been associated with him in the closest bonds of friendship from boyhood to the day of his death. We know of nothing more touching than the unbroken friendship that existed between Hugh Liner and William Porter for the long period of 56 years. Referring to this, the Argus states, 56 years ago they first met in Dublin as strangers, the one a boy of 14, the other some 2 years younger. From that day until yesterday at 10 o'clock, there was never an interruption of their friendship and hardly a break in the perfect union of their lives. Given the above quotes from McCracken's own biography, this in memoriam, and other references and evidence from other sources, I'd say the probability is that theirs was a same-sex relationship. And yet McCracken persists in adopting a less plausible view that it wasn't. He notes a few of the letters which Porter wrote to Liner while on the law circuit in 1840 begin with the words, "Dearly beloved." But McCracken adds, the words, "dearly beloved," may have a special significance, but equally, Porter may only be echoing the words of the General Confession in the Church of Ireland prayer book. And that would be consistent with his frequent resort to biblical and Shakespearean turns of speech. This historian is determined to apply the interpretation which is less likely, less plausible. And the result of this implausible interpretation is another lesser spotted queer Ulster Protestant. We don't have or need complete evidence, for example, witnesses to them having sex, as in the case of the Bishop of Clogher and the soldier, that William Porter and Hugh Liner were in a same-sex relationship. That would be set the bar too high. Ours is a matter of interpretation, a reasonable, plausible interpretation based on the available evidence. I am satisfied to include these two men among Ulster's lesser spotted queer Protestants. Now you may ask, why does William Porter's sexuality matter? It matters to how historians explain Porter's successful career. For example, historian David Harkness emphasizes Porter's liberal Christian convictions. And T. Davenport referred to Porter being, and I quote, "a product of a brand of Presbyterianism from which the Huguenot ideas of liberty, brackets, as opposed to Calvinist authoritarianism, close brackets, sprang." Can we not at least open up discussion of the possibility that his progressive ideas on socially and politically oppressed groups, like Blacks, Catholics, and women, may not only have derived from his liberal Presbyterianism, but also from his homosexuality? To do so would be to follow some interpretations of the humanitarianism of another queer Ulster Protestant, Roger Casement, of whom we had an LGBT History Club talk by Jeff Dudgeon last August. Now, I've been told that I can't give a talk or tell a story without mentioning Cork. Therefore, I wouldn't like to disappoint, and so I will mention Cork. But it does still have relevance to Ulster's lesser spotted queer Protestants. In 1984, while living in Cork, I took myself to Cork's Everyman Theatre. It was there for the first time in my life I attended a live performance of ballet. And me being me, I kept the flyer. Here is a slide of the pic of my flyer. Irish National Ballet, August 1984. On the reverse side, it describes a performance including Swan Lake, choreography by Matthias Petipa, reproduced by David Gordon. It's this David Gordon, dance choreographer with Irish National Ballet, is the next person I want to bring to your attention. Here's a picture of David Gordon in the center. This is a still picture from a 1975 RTE documentary on the Irish Ballet Company, in which David features and which you can watch on the RTE archives. David was from Ulster, from Belfast. He was Protestant and he was a gay man. David became a prominent member of the Cork LGBT community in the 1970s, and you can listen to him being interviewed by Orla Egan on the Cork LGBT archive. In that 3-minute interview, he discusses the social circuit of fabulous gay parties in Cork in the 1970s. Remember, that was 20 years before male same-sex relationships were decriminalised in the Republic. David has been forgotten in his native Ulster. This is evident at the time of his death in 2007, in that there were prominent obituaries in the Southern Irish press in contrast to his native Ulster. I'll quote some extracts from the obituary to him in the Irish Times. Heading: Iconic ballet master gave hope to young in an intolerant time. David Gordon, who has died aged 69, was Ireland's leading ballet master. He began his career as a boy soprano in his local church in the Dock area of Belfast in the late 1940s. At the age of 15, he was chosen to represent Northern Ireland at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, singing solo and in chorus with other boy sopranos. After the coronation, Dame Ninette de Valois, the founder of the Royal Ballet, who happened to be in the audience, asked to meet with David. He told her of his desire to become a dancer. Dame Ninette offered him a scholarship to study at the Royal Ballet. In many ways, he was the Billy Elliot of the Shankill. As a dancer, David toured the world, sharing the stage with some of the greatest ballet dancers of the 20th century, including Rudolph Nureyev and Margaret Fonteyn. David went to Cork for what he thought would be several months' work. In fact, he never left and remained as ballet dancer with the Irish National Ballet for the entire 17 years of his existence. Obviously, being from Cork, you can understand why he went to Cork and never left. When the decision was taken to axe the funding for the Irish National Ballet, David decided to remain in Cork, where he was well known both as a flamboyant and endearing figure, easily recognizable by his balletic pose, flowing shawls, and silver jewellery. Cork embraced him, and he in turn responded positively to the personality of Cork, becoming affectionately known as Mother Gordon. In social terms, he became an important pioneering figure within Cork's gay community, cutting an uncompromising and colourful gate through 1970s Ireland. Suffice to say, through his example, many young people found the courage to be themselves at a time in Ireland when society as a whole was a society less tolerant. The fine obituary of David Gordon. The funeral service of Mother Gordon took place in August 2007 in Cork's Anglican Church of Ireland St. Finbarr's Cathedral. Rest in glamour. Although I've introduced you to David Mother Gordon, by now you may be asking me, where are Ulster's lesser spotted queer Protestant women? Audience, Sheila Hamilton. Sheila, the audience. Sheila was from Ulster, from Cookstown. Sheila was Protestant and lesbian. I first met Sheila in 1988 when we both students at Queen's University. Before Sheila, I had never knowingly met a lesbian. We became close friends. It was Sheila who first told me about Sappho. Sappho was a woman who lived in ancient Greece and wrote poems about her love of women. I wanted to give Sheila a present, a special present, but what could I get her? And that's when I saw an advert for the perfect gift, an advert in a magazine. This magazine, it's called Upstart, a magazine for gay men and women in Northern Ireland. Upstart was produced by local gay activist Sean McGowan. This is the 1980s. And I'd like to give a shout out to Sean McGowan because Sean is currently in hospital, and the LGBT community in Northern Ireland owe a great deal to older activists like Sean who produced magazines for the LGBT community like this. This is an advert in Upstart, which I read from Upstart January 1990. And the advert says, Sappho Woman and the Greater Belfast Dykes by Gay May Kincaid. The first lesbian cartoon book to be published in Ireland. A dangerous, daring and hilarious glimpse into Belfast lesbian life. Fly into fantasy with Sappho Woman and the Greater Belfast Dykes. Available from Just Books Belfast. So I went down to Just Books in Belfast and I bought 2 copies. One for Sheila, and here is my own copy. And I'm just going to bring you up here to have a look at, because you can see on the front of it is a picture of Sappho Woman as Superwoman in her green, her pink outfit, and behind her is Belfast City Hall. And Belfast City Hall in the 1980s used to have a banner that said Belfast says no, but here it has a pink banner that says Belfast says wow. Inside on page 4, there's a cartoon with a text that reads, "We can all rest assured that when there's a dyke in distress, a feminist in a flurry, a woman in worry, and a lesbian in deep shit, Sappho Woman will be there." In 2021, we could do with a superhero like this. But in Ulster in 1989, Sappho Woman had to remain less spotted. The author of Sappho Woman, Gil McKnight, had to publish it under a pseudonym. The pseudonym Gay May Kincaid. Sappho Woman was not distributed commercially and was largely forgotten. Someone, sometime, donated a copy to the Linen Hall Library. For decades, Sappho Woman was locked up in the basement of the library among the archives. Even the dangerous paramilitaries had been released as part of the peace process earlier than our lesbian superhero. Fortunately, 2 years ago, Jason from the Linen Hall, who's with us tonight, came upon her in the archives and released Sappho Woman. Before I move on from Sappho Woman, you may be curious. Sappho Woman was from Ulster. She was queer, but was she a Protestant? To which I reply, superheroes don't declare a religious denomination. Another of Ulster's lesser spotted queer Protestants who has been forgotten is David Templeton. Here's a photograph of David. David is described in a report in the Irish Times on the 26th of March, 1997. The Reverend David Templeton was a celebrity cleric in Northern Ireland. He gave sermons on pop music as a regular broadcaster for BBC. "There was nothing old-fashioned or fuddy-duddy about him," said a fellow minister. "He was really outgoing. He liked a laugh and a joke." Another colleague said he was bohemian, a bit of a character. David was the antithesis of the dour Presbyterian. He was minister of Grey Abbey Presbyterian Church, County Down. A bachelor, he had a wide social circle, but led a very private existence. 18 months earlier in 1996 at Belfast International Airport, David was returning home from a city break in Amsterdam. Customs officials searched his luggage and found a video, an adult gay pornographic video. David paid a standard fine, and the police were called in to investigate the incident. His home was searched, but no legal proceedings were initiated. However, the incident was leaked to a Belfast tabloid newspaper, the Sunday Life, who later ran a sensationalist story referring to him as gay porn cleric. He resigned as minister at Grey Abbey. David said he would have liked to have stayed in Grey Abbey, but he didn't receive the necessary support from senior church figures there. He said he was in a Christian cafe in Belfast one day and was asked to leave the premises. He became suicidal and received treatment in a mental institution. David moved to a flat in a Loyst area of North Belfast. On the 7th of February 1997, 3 masked men, later identified as members of the loyalist paramilitary Ulster Volunteer Force, broke into his home, wielding cudgels studded with nails. David sustained broken legs and serious head injuries. Aged 42, he died 6 weeks later. This Thursday, the 24th of March, is the 24th anniversary of David Templeton's death. In the last part of our search for the lesser spotted queer Ulster Protestant, we turn to a magazine, a church magazine. I have my own hard copy, but I'll show you the cover. It's called Lowdown, not to be confused with Lockdown. Lowdown was a Church of Ireland magazine, and this is the cover of the edition from June 1980. Produced in Dublin, Lowdown was the magazine of the Diocesan Council of Youth. This may explain the fantasy cover. A member of the executive of the Diocesan Council of Youth and a contributor to Lowdown was Albert Ogle. Here's a photo of Albert, which appeared in an edition of Lowdown. Albert was from Ulster, from Belfast. He was Protestant. Indeed, he was very Protestant. Albert was an ordained clergyman in the Church of Ireland, and he was a gay man. In this issue of Lockdown, June 1980, Albert published under his own name an article about homosexuality. Here is a slide of a pic I've taken of that article. It's headed "A Case in Prejudice" by the Reverend Albert Ogle. It opens with the words, "Queer, fag, pansy have all become part of our language when we describe a group of people in our society. Usually the description is in the context of a joke or a term of abuse." Albert's article is not personal about him, but it is sympathetic in support of understanding and law reform. The editor of the magazine also inserted a couple of hard-hitting cartoons. Cartoons which do not have a strapline but speak for themselves, like this cartoon. In this cartoon, we see on the top the figure of a bishop. We know it is a bishop because of his bishop's hat. Below him are two small figures, two men, one with his arm around the other. The bishop is wielding a mallet, about to strike the two men. 1 year later, in the edition of Lowdown for June 1981, there is another mention of Albert. It reads, "The recent departure of the Reverend Albert Ogle to England has left a gap in the Dublin youth work which is unlikely to be filled. His enthusiasm and eagerness to demonstrate the meaning of a living faith impressed many. He was liked for his warmth, sense of humour and frankness. A curate who can relate to young people and break the normal clergy-teenager barrier is rare. Albert was one." No explanation was given in the magazine as to Albert. A hidden history which does not appear in the official or mainstream church histories, but which is passed on within the LGBT community orally. The story of why yet another of Ulster's queer Protestants had to leave for England. Eventually, I asked Albert to write his story for me. I wanted to try to make better known the stories of our lesser spotted queer Protestants. I published it in a book in 2012, which I co-edited, entitled "Moving Forward Together, Homosexuality and the Church of Ireland." I'll read you an extract from a chapter titled "From Exile to Reconciliation" by Albert Ogle. In the early 1980s, it was still illegal to be gay in Ireland, and there was a stigma which the church strongly endorsed through its interpretation of scripture. My partner Frank and I were young and naive, and we really didn't know what we were dealing with in terms of the culture of the Church of Ireland, which was still very homophobic. At St. Bartholomew's Church in Dublin, my rector, when he discovered I was gay and in a relationship, suspended me from all duties and even from saying goodbye to parishioners. Henry McAdoo, the then Archbishop of Dublin, also dealt with the issue in a very reactive and hidebound way. He allegedly said, "I want him out of here quickly and quietly." I had to leave my home and my country within 3 months, and it was horrific. I had to come out to my father, my mother already knew, worried that the news might hit the press. He told me that he never wanted to see my partner ever again. He got his wish. My only sin was that I was living in a 6-year committed relationship with another man. We limped off to London, like so many Irish gays before us, trying to pick up the pieces. The exile had devastating consequences on our relationship, and we finally parted in 1982 when I moved to the USA. I moved to LA and began the ministry at the Los Angeles Gay and Lesbian Center. You can read more of Albert's story for yourselves in Moving Forward Together. To conclude, I have shared with you stories of Ulster's queer Protestants who are lesser spotted because of denial, erasure, invisibility, murder, and exile. However, I want one of our lesser spotted queer Protestants to have the last word. I am delighted to welcome in the audience tonight, and will speak to him later, all the way from the USA, one of Ulster's lesser spotted queer Protestants, the Reverend Albert Ogle. Albert, I know you're in the audience. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you unmute yourself, you can say hello.
Thank you, Richard. It's good to be with you. This is wonderful.
Thank you for joining us, and thank the audience, and back to Jason, and we'll have an opportunity for some questions, and we'll come back to you for a few words as well.
Excellent, Richard. Thank you very much for that. Really enjoyable. And as promised, there were a few laughs in there as well and a bit of crack. Just while you're having a bit of a breather there, Richard, I might just promote the next meeting of the LGBT History Club for those who are interested. So the next topic, this is a monthly meeting, generally on the last Tuesday of the month at 8 o'clock, for those of you who aren't aware. The title of the next meeting is Cross-Border LGBT Activism in Ireland from 1977 to 1999. And this is by Abigail Fletcher, who is currently doing a PhD at the University of Edinburgh. So this is going to be on Tuesday, the 27th of April at 8 o'clock. So we've a bit of a way to go until that meeting. But if anybody's interested, if you just fire your email address, even in the chat function, either myself or Richard can revert back to you, and you'd be more than welcome to join the LGBT History Club. As I say, for now, it's on Zoom, but whenever the library reopens, our plans are to host these as physical meetings in the library, and maybe we'll look at ways of streaming those as well to try and maximize our audience. Again, just while Richard's still getting a breather there, I thought I've just written Sappho Woman on the page because I knew that I had to kind of pick up on that after Richard mentioning me in dispatches. A few years ago, I was curating an exhibition for the Linen Hall Library. It was I was given a vague brief, which was, a women's history exhibition. So I sort of scoured the library high and low for things which were relevant to women and women's history. And I come up with this idea of Anonymous was a woman from the Virginia Woolf quote. And without getting into the ins and outs of the exhibition, I stumbled across this Sappho Woman comic book in the Northern Ireland Political Collection, which is really a definitive archive of the Troubles, and Sappho Woman was tucked in there. So she was never hidden away or anything like that. Hiding in plain sight, I suppose, would be a better way to describe it. But I thought I would share just this funny little anecdote. Whenever we had kind of finalized the exhibition and we were doing bits and pieces of promotion and marketing people and stuff getting involved, and a lot of these things are kind of taken out of your hands. One of the more striking images from the exhibition was this image of Sappho Woman, and so that was put on some of the literature. And we received the literature, the delivery of the literature, and I remember looking at it and thinking, jeepers, I wonder, do we have permission to use that image of Sappho Woman? It's probably definitely the first thing that I should have checked. But as I say, these things were kind of taken out of my hand. So I made some inquiries as to, did we actually have permission as a library to use this, and it quickly transpired that we didn't. So I had then to try and track down the author. Now, me being sort of naive, was totally reeled in by that Gay May Kincaid pseudonym. I hadn't a clue. I was searching high and low on Google for Gay May Kincaid. It got me hook, line, and sinker. I ended up contacting quite a few people. Margaret Ward, historian Margaret Ward, to see if she knew anyone from the publishing house, which was Maeve Publishing, to see if she knew who was behind the pseudonym. And I think it might have been her, actually, after contacting quite a few people who didn't pick up on the pseudonym, actually, not just me. I think it might have been her or someone maybe who I contacted in and around that time who said, Jason, stop and look at that pseudonym. You're getting carried away here. So that made the job of tracking down the author all the more difficult. Somebody suggested that it might have been such and such from the Shankill Road. It might have been such and such from Andersonstown. Every lead that I had was turning up a dead end. Until finally I found someone, I think it was someone from Cara Friend, maybe, who alerted me that they knew someone from the publishing house. So I tracked down someone from the publishing house who then was able to tell me that in actual fact that it was Jill McKnight. It was this author called Jill McKnight. So then I had to go onto Facebook and find all the Jill McKnights that I could find and messaged most of them. Most of them obviously weren't the one that I was looking for, until I found one who happened to be alive and well, I'm pleased to say, and living in Greece, of all places. She was very apologetic, put me to all this trouble trying to track her down. And before I even had a chance to kind of explain about what I was doing, in terms of the Anonymous Was a Woman exhibition, she went into this whole big explanation as to why she did what she did. Fascinating. But the key line that I'll always remember from it was, she said to me, Jason, anonymity in those days was absolutely vital, or words to that effect. But she said anonymity was, it was paramount to that project that she was working on. And she didn't even know the title of the exhibition, which was Anonymous Was a Woman. So needless to say, she gave us permission, and Sappho Woman was plastered all over that exhibition. And then Richard came along shortly after and gave a brief performance in the Linen Hall Library. And it seemed for a while that Sappho Woman was just following me around everywhere. I hadn't even read the comic, and yet it seemed to play a major role in that exhibition, and a major part of my early career in the Linen Hall Library, actually. So that's Sappho Woman and Jill McKnight. I might just hand over back to Richard then, who's, I think, hoping that Albert might want to say a couple of words to us, while I can just see if any questions are coming through then for Richard.
Yeah, yes, please. Because this is an opportunity for us to, share a history, and we have someone who was part of that. Albert, like, say a few words.
It's great to be a lesser spotted Protestant and still alive, Richard. I thought your talk was great. It was just fascinating, and great work and good work that you've done. Mervyn Kingston was a wonderful hero of mine, and so we're grateful for everybody who just worked hard at being who they were with integrity and so on. So I'm now working in Philadelphia. I've been accepted since 1982 into the American Episcopal Church. So there are parts of the world that are much more open and accepting of our gifts and what we have to bring to the church and the world. And also the fact that we're a globalized society now. You can't, in some ways, the exile community continues to do really good work, not only for the communities we're now in, but also to continue to support the work that you're all doing in difficult places. And the fact we're globalized, here we are in a pandemic, so the positive side of that is we're in this together, and that there are resources and checks and balances that the church just now has to pay attention to.
Yes, because you're part of the Anglican Church in the United States, and when denominations try and say there's only one way of being church and it has to be homophobic, you defy them by what the good example that you give us in the United States, that our lives in the wider community and within the churches, can improve, but they only improve by people being activist. And Unfortunately, we saw that just, by being in a loving relationship, that can bring down the wrath of the institution on top of you with such heavy personal consequences. But we were thrilled that you contributed to our book in 2012, because of course even then and now, we can't find serving clergy who can come out, who can be spotted, because when people come out, particularly within the faith community, they pay a price in this society, and that's still an ongoing struggle. If anyone has a question, just raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we'll do our best.
There's one just came through there, Richard. It's actually directed at Albert while we have him. Nigel asks Albert, do you miss Ulster?
I do, and I have two brothers in Newton Art, so I go back. Every year I go back and see my family and friends. I've been trying to get back for the last year, but obviously we can't travel. And so Ireland is still a big part of my life. I was able to do a master's in international peace studies in Dublin at Trinity maybe 12 years ago, and so I was back for 2 years, and I reconciled with John Neal, who was the guy who fired me. We had he apologized. He said, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have done what I did to you, and so we reconciled and we remain friends and so on. So I think there's progress, and I can see that, for instance, I can see it, say, in the American Episcopal Church, we started ordaining women, and it was absolutely taboo. And now all the churches in the Anglican Communion are doing that. I think we're beginning to see more gay and lesbian and transgender clergy, including bishops. So the fact that we can do it, and there's support from both the lay community and the clergy community, is a good sign. So I think the work that we're doing, and we're doing as a global community, is essential.
Thanks for that, Albert. And I hope Nigel, that answers your question. Another one has just come through there directed for you, Richard. It's from Jerry. Any plans to turn some of these stories into a book?
Well, I mean, I'm very much of view that people should tell their own stories. So if he's referring to my own stories, I do have a preference myself for the oral telling. And one of the reasons for that is because I don't believe our stories are fixed. In fact, Albert's own life is an example of that, because later in his life, the man who was responsible for firing him saw that he had behaved badly and apologized. So I feel that those stories that I can tell now, which maybe even in 6 months' time, something may have happened, will change that story or how I feel about that story. So personally, I'm very attached to the live oral form of storytelling. But as regards these types of stories, I'm keen that they will become more widely available in whatever format. And I'm pleased, the interest in this topic. Okay, I went for, maybe a funny or provocative title to draw people in, but I know that, and people know that it won't just be entertainment, that there will also be, something to reflect on, and hopefully to take away with them. Obviously, I would love if stories like this were heard by the people who really need to hear them, which is particularly the homophobic leaderships of our denominations, whether it's the Vatican this week or the Presbyterian Church or Church of Ireland bishops. But of course, they don't want to hear these stories. But I think within the wider community, actually oral storytelling is, as you know from other events, is becoming more popular, and it is one way, especially in Ireland, that we do have of sharing information and also raising awareness about history, but also about our own lives and lives of people in our community.
If I come in, actually, Richard, I hadn't thought about your story being a book, but actually I think somebody might make a very good book, or better yet, a very good tear-jerky romantic movie about you and Mervyn's life together. And I'm not joking about that either. But no, I thought there is something about the printed word, and there is something about the physicality of a book that has value in itself. And you may be much more of an oral storyteller. Sorry, this is the historian in me coming out. You may be much more of an oral storyteller, so it might not be your job, but I think it is somebody's job to get this history down in printed form as a book. And that's for those who don't know me, I am another Anglican clergyman in exile from the Church of Ireland because I was out of the closet. And that was 25 years after Albert, and things are not any better, actually, I would say, which is very sad. And I'm in a conservative, with small and big C's, Brexit voting small town in southern England, and my sexuality is, and I'm completely out, and my sexuality is an absolute and total non-issue here. It is so different.
Thank you, Jerry, for saying that, because Jerry also contributed to the volume Moving Forward Together. And Jerry, when he was still living in Northern Ireland, was, open, queer Protestant. And that was a very positive example to many of us. But of course, you pay a price because of the homophobia of the church leadership. So there's no point in being naive about the consequences even today. But on the other hand, we are, I suppose, encouraged by the example of people who are prepared to live their lives openly and with integrity. I mean, Jerry's story has been, written down, but again, it's how do you share that with the people who need to hear it? Because they don't want to hear the truth of our lives. They don't want to hear that we have loving relationships. They want to pathologize us, and that's a challenge. I should say that, of course, there is more history being written, including by some historians like Tom Hume I mentioned, who are writing social history. So that is, an improvement. And also for LGBT History Club, we're thrilled that kind of a mainstream institution like the Linen Hall Library was so comfortable about teaming up with the LGBT Heritage Project to host the LGBT History Club, and putting our events out on their social media. I mean, that is mainstreaming, and that's progress.
I think that's a good point for me just to jump in and say that we have recorded all the previous sessions of the LGBT History Club. So if you go to the Linen Hall Library's YouTube channel, you can watch all those retrospectively. And you'll also see Richard's extended talk on Sappho Woman, which was part of another lecture series that we did. But if that story of Sappho Woman intrigues you, Linen Hall Library's YouTube channel, you'll get the full version, about half an hour's worth of Richard talking about Sappho Woman. I'm pleased to say, Richard, there's email addresses flying in here for the LGBT History Club, so that's great. I will share those with you, and we can get the membership fees out of them first thing tomorrow morning. That's a joke, by the way. There are no membership
fees. It's free.
That's a joke, by the way. There are no membership fees, completely free. We also have Nigel saying here that this is the biggest Zoom audience he's ever seen, over 80 people at one stage. So that's great. We're breaking all sorts of records tonight. And someone has asked, let's see, who was it? It was Fidelma who asks, if this is turned into a movie, Richard, who's playing you?
That's very kind. I should said two things. One is, we've deliberately opted for this open meeting format because we recognize that in lockdown, it's a pretty different time for people who identify as LGBT. We're less likely to be living near our families, often estranged from our families, and we don't have the social organizations or the pubs to go to. So even to attend an event like this is a social event, I think, for many of us, just be able to maybe see other people and chat a bit. The thing about my own story is, I decided not to talk about my late partner, who was very much a queer Ulster Protestant, because that is, particularly painful for me. And a talk like this is not just another academic talk, because the content of our history for many of us is very personal, it's so this notion of being detached or being kind of objective in some sort of way, that you don't have an angle. And I'll be honest, I have an angle. I'm pro-LGBT. I have an agenda, which is to raise awareness. But also, I was conscious of David Templeton's death. It was in Dublin when someone like Declan Flynn was murdered, and there was maybe a popular response to it. Here, when we've had people in our community murdered, it doesn't seem to have evoked us. Maybe it's because of the troubles that people are more used to murder. But the Presbyterian Church certainly isn't going to be marking the murder of one of their clergy, and their role in contributing to that, because of course homophobia, transphobia doesn't come out of nowhere. It's socially constructed, partly through theology and partly through the socialization within institutions. And in some denominations like the Presbyterian Church, it's actually getting worse. So I can't ignore that context when I'm giving the talk, and I deliberately showed up the census form, because for me to be able to self-identify, and maybe this is the same for, not everyone here identifies LGBT, but many of you do. For me to be able to actually tick in a census form that I am a gay man is a huge step forward, because there were times when it was criminal to declare. For much of my life I've lived in a situation where I declared that as criminal. So that's why I ordered the hard copy, and that's why I photocopied it, and that's why I'm going to talk about it again. Though, as you said, I decided for the religious question, I don't want to be part of a sectarian head count, and also it's there's issues of accuracy in my case as well. But so I could not have a talk on the day after the census and not recognize that fact. And maybe some of the others have similar feelings about what it was like to be recorded for the first time.
Great. I think that's a perfect way to end, Richard. I'm conscious that the numbers are starting to dwindle now that we've just went past 8 o'clock, because that's the time that we promised everyone that we would finish that. But the comments that are coming through are all positive. Everyone's enjoyed your talk, and I've enjoyed being here. And for those who are still with us, we are on again, Linen Hall Library, that is, along with Imagine Belfast on Wednesday night at, let me get this right now, 7, I think we're on 7 or half 7. Check the Linen Hall Library website, you'll find out. It's a football themed event about the Football Association of Ireland breaking away from the Irish Football Association in 1921. So we're marking that centenary on Wednesday night with Cormac Moore, the historian from Dublin. So without further ado, I'm going to bring the session to a close. And for those of you who have shared your email addresses with us, thank you very much. We'll be in touch as soon as we can about the LGBT History Club. And for the rest of you, have a good evening.
Jason, before we go, do you have those emails? Can you get them? Can you save the chat?
I've written them all down here frantically in my notebook. So
good. And the other thing is, I'm really pleased because this event has been recorded, which means Albert and Jerry Lynch's appearance has also been recorded. So it's more evidence of the lesser spotted queer Protestants. I'll be in touch with the two of you separately afterwards, anyhow too. But thank you all for joining me tonight, and we look forward to many of you joining us next month for another LGBT History Club. So good. Oh, was that a wave or a blessing you were given there, Father Albert? We can get one from Jerry as well. Jerry, you're authorized now to give us a blessing as well. We're looking forward very much to have you back. I know because of COVID you haven't been able to get over so easily, but we're looking forward very much to I know you had to go abroad to be trained, but that doesn't mean that you can't come back to celebrate. So we're looking forward to that.
No doubt they'll let me loose at the altar in St. George's at some point. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad that there's some place that will receive you. Okay. Just now you can close this down if you like. And thank you very much. Good night.
Thanks, Richard.
Stay safe.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.